Well, this happened, and the entire internet collectively pointed and laughed. If you don't know what this is, these are two new characters that Marvel is unveiling in their upcoming new Warriors comic. They are a psychic pair of twins, the one on the left of which is a cryokinetic who makes snowflake-shaped shurikens, and the right one can manifest pink shields, but only for others, not for himself. Also, the one on the right is non-binary, which means Marvel made a non-binary character and then decided to name them Snowflake. Not that the twin brother named Safespace is much better. I desperately wish that this was a joke, but it isn't, and there is a bit of debate over whether or not this is meant to be completely legit, or if it's kind of to bait the anti-SJW types into outrage and then use that as evidence that they're the victims and doing the right thing here. Personally, I think it's legit because Marvel has been a bit notorious lately for its woke or broke mentality, and I think that this is just an extreme manifestation of that. Regardless of what it actually is, this is very telling of a much larger problem that we see with large media production desperately wanting the brownie points for being progressive while going about it in all the wrong ways. We see it over and over again where companies advertise or even brag about how they're progressive this or progressive that, but then in practice they either do the bare minimum of representation or worse, give completely awful and terrible representation. This problem comes in many forms and impacts most minority or historically oppressed groups on a sliding scale of badness. So much of it to me comes in the form of being incredibly reductionary, where creatives and characters are meant to be valued not because of the hard work or their talents or their characteristics, but simply because of something that they were born. And then the companies love to point out, oh hey, look, we are allowing a person that belongs to a minority or historically oppressed group to exist, and we're allowing them to do a thing? Aren't we so progressive? This is an absolutely massive can of worms with lots of arguments one way or another over how much good Hollywood and big media is actually doing, but one thing that we all agree on is that this is god-awful. We may vary a bit on exactly why we think it's awful, but we know deep down that it is just bad. There were a couple of other characters that sucked too, and only one out of this new lineup didn't completely suck balls kinda by default. But these two were the worst by far. Reading the descriptions of their monikers, it says that the two of them are very socially aware, and since those words were typically used as insults, they decided to reclaim them and make them powerful. Yes, there are instances where someone owns an insult or a community has reclaimed a word meant originally to insult them, but context is incredibly important and the amount of self-awareness here is less than zero. Oh, and just visually, they're so gross. It's like, hey kids, the biologically female one is wearing all blue and the biologically male one is wearing all pink. Do you see how woke I am? I don't know a pair of twins older than the age of 5 that want to wear matching outfits like this, though clearly Marvel has no idea how siblings behave with one another, and they look so outdated. The colors contribute to that, but a friend who helped me out on this described them as roller derby rally participants rather than superheroes, and it is a painfully accurate description. So I decided I was going to redesign these dumb not completely from the ground up. In fact, I wanted to keep as much about their description as possible accurate. Just change up the names and the outfit designs. Even the color scheme could stay, though it ended up giving the whole thing a bit of an 80s vibe. I would have colored them very differently if they were OCs, but I wanted to keep the framework where I could here. I just started immediately with the names because just no. Starting with Snowflake, there are a lot of words related to ice and snow, the most badass of those being Frostbite. But there are already a few minor Marvel characters with that name, nobody major, but I wanted to see if I could find an unused one. Avalanche and Blizzard were already taken as well, so then just as a starting point, you could have put any other word besides flake after snow and it would have instantly been better. Snowstorm, snow flurry, maybe even snowcap, any of that. But then I fell on the concept of calling them white snow or simply snow as a play on Snow White. This isn't the name that I ended up going with, but this idea was the biggest influence for the outfit, but I will explain explain more when I get through the names. For Safespace, it was a lot harder to come up with something else. The only thing I could think of, place it with Safeguard, which I still think is much better. But the one thing about these guys is even though they are twins and they have a psychic link, the only thing cohesive about them is their ugly outfits and their terrible names, and I needed to change both. This is why I think the names were thought of first, because why would you have a set of twins where one controls ice and the other projects force fields unless you wanted to make the play on words with Safespace and Snowflake? But anyways, thinking of how to name them in a way that was somewhat cohesive, my friend had a fantastic idea to call them Hail and Haven. It's a play on the phrase hell and heaven, or heaven and hell, just depending on how you would say it, and it accurately describes what both of their powers are: Hail throwing solid chunks of ice, and Haven creating force field barriers to protect others. I thought it was a fantastic idea and went with that, so from now on I will only refer to them as Hail and Haven. For overall design, for how important Marvel felt to try and make them more modern, the designs are very outdated looking, so definitely a very basic starting point was me wanting to give them a more updated look. Starting with Hail, and as I mentioned, I was inspired by Snow White for their look. Snow White has skin white like snow, hair black like ebony, and lips red like blood. I flipped it around a bit to give her hair white like snow, skin dark like ebony, and eyes red like blood. This worked well with the brothers' eyes, who were already pink, so now the eye colors were just different shades of each other. I also took the concept of the puff sleeves and the larger pants to somewhat emulate a dress with a tighter torso a la Snow White's original design. Since they were described as throwing snowflake shurikens, I also took a bit of inspiration of Japanese style for the overall shape and certain style elements. I also darkened up both of their skin tones, but I made Hail's a bit darker to reflect that more ebony skin shade. I wanted the two of them to look like they belong together while still having their individuality, and again, not just dressing like each other, because no siblings want to do that. A description of Haven was that he was kind of a stereotypical jock personality, and since Hail was described as the more offensive hero while Haven the more defensive, I wanted their looks to reflect as such. Haven having a thicker top chest plate with shoulder extensions and thicker gauntlets compared to Hail. Haven's design was mostly inspired by like a defensive lineman, which ended up working really well with carrying over the puff sleeve concept that I started on Hail. His fabric around his waist also reflected the towels that football players tuck into their waistbands and gave a way to add some weight to the bottom of the design, as I had felt it was a bit too top heavy before. I also like to imagine that since Haven is kind of a jock, he'd have a lot of older extra gear lying around, and that's something his sibling could borrow and put on their outfit, hence why you see both of them having the same types of gloves and knee pads. I hated them both having matching crew cuts because, again, siblings do not do like that after the age of 5. But I did like the idea of them both having dreads because you don't see a lot of heroes or even characters with dreads. But while I left Haven with a full head of dreads, I took inspiration from the Frost Elite skin in Rainbow Six to give Hail a half-shaved, half-dread look. For shoes, I kept Haven's kind of similar to the original in that they looked more sporty, and given he's an athlete, I thought that made sense. I also kept them pink because, at least for my athletic brother and all of his teammates, having the brighter colored sneakers or cleats is considered very fashionable amongst the jocks, for lack of a better word. Hail, I wanted a sort of snow boot impression, so I gave them a bit of a larger, shorter boot with a slight heel. And certain elements of the original designs I kept or only changed slightly, and that's mostly in the large collars that you see and the basic line shapes on the torso. I also kept the earrings that they both had. There were some individual details in here that weren't completely awful, it was just when combined with everything else, we got a whole mess. For coloring, I mentioned earlier, I wanted to keep the color palette given, not just to show that you could do something not awful with it, but also because they were the colors that related most to each of their powers. Hail makes ice and Haven creates pink shields. Both of those colors, especially pink, work much better as an accent color, meaning like bright blue, not just blue in general. Though I do have a bit of a bias against pink. I don't typically like bright pink just on its own, only in accents, but never mind that, that ain't really important. You could still do the traditional gendered color swap thing and not make it completely outrageous and over the top in a way that feels pandering. So both of these designs used black and white a lot, and even though I knew I wanted Haven's hair to be dark, I definitely didn't want to just go through and add white wherever I put black on Hail and vice versa, because that's incredibly cheesy. On both of them, I really liked the look of the top plate of their torsos being light while the rest of it was dark. On Haven, I just changed it so that his sleeves were also black to give it a bit more of that football jersey look, while the white sleeves worked in giving a more snow-capped look for Hail. So yes, this is my concept of a redesign of Snowflake and Safespace. Everything about their powers and personality can stay exactly the same, though I'm not sure how much I'd trust Marvel to properly handle characters that care about social issues, but no matter. I just gave them some better monikers, changed up their looks to make them more modern, and not just have them completely match each other. I think we already have something better here, though I think you can only go up with where Marvel started. Comic style stuff isn't the usual for me. I don't typically do superhero OCs either, though I do like how these guys turned out. I did realize at one point though that I suck at drawing guys compared to girls and I need to practice that more. I would also like to just note that Hale ended up looking a bit more androgynous than they originally did. That wasn't an intentional thing trying to say that non-binary people have to look androgynous. They can look however, it was just the nature of the outfit that ended up kind of making it look like that. Marvel and all of these big companies need to learn that you can tackle social issues and be inclusive and care about these things without being complete numbskulls about it. There seems to be this very warped perception of these issues coming from these companies, and they end up mishandling them as a result. It's something that needs to be talked about, and it needs to be called out when companies do stuff like that, because otherwise we may only continue to get more stuff like Snowflake and Safespace. Thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed and liked my redesign concept for these characters. Let me know what your reaction to the new Marvel characters were, or if you hadn't heard of them, what you think of them now. If you did enjoy, you can like the video, and if you'd like to see more from me, maybe you can subscribe. But if not, no worries. And regardless, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.